What's up, guys? Today we are going to be discussing A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. Now, I have mentioned this in a video that I'm making that will be released later, but I just finished this like a couple weeks ago, and this is an awesome book. It was a recommendation by my former English teacher, and I'm very glad that I read it. I ended up reading it with a book club of people, who were also in the English class, and this book was phenomenal. And I just kind of wanted to make a video to showcase the theme of this text and certain excerpts from the text that I found striking or like really cool. So I'd say if you have not read this and you're planning on reading it, maybe don't watch all of this because I'm going through the whole course of the book. But I will tell you right now, the title is pretty self-explanatory. It's a life story. It's about this boy named Stephen. It starts off with his first memory ever, which is a story that his father told him. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow coming down along the road. This moo cow that was coming down along the road met a nice little boy named Baby Tucku. So, first memory ever, and then it ends with, I won't read it, but I'm just refreshing myself. It ends with his diary entries as a university student. So you have a very big window of time in this not so big book. If I were to have this book in normal print, it would be much thicker. I just have a small text going on. But yeah, basically this book is amazing. You will understand this video better if you have read it, because the main thing that I'm going to be discussing here is theme. While I was reading this, I took pretty extensive quotes down in this little book of mine, which start at this green tab and go all the way through. And immediately when I started this book, there were quotes that I found pretty fantastic. And some of them don't mean much when it comes to the story, but just the way that they're written as someone who strives to be a better writer every day. You know, you look at these and James Joyce is a great example of an author who takes a small thing and can describe it in an artistic way. Like, for example, when Stephen, the main character, was in grammar school, there was a mathlete thing or something, like a math competition or something along those lines, or it could have been spelling, and he did not win, and the winner got a lavender, it was like first, second, third, I think, and the winners got like a lavender, a cream, and a pink colored ribbon to wear, and Stephen got a green one, which I assume was for participation. I don't really remember, and he was like slightly disappointed, but he settled on the fact that it was okay. And James Joyce writing that, he could have just said Stephen was disappointed, but then he settled on the fact that it was okay. But instead, he said, lavender and cream and pink roses were beautiful to think of. Perhaps a wild rose might be like those colors, and he remembered the song about the wild rose blossoms on the little green place. But you could not have a green rose, but perhaps somewhere in the world you could. And that was the first line that I came across in this novel that I was just like, holy crap, Like, couldn't have been said any better, honestly. And that really shows through this whole entire thing. And obviously I'm not going to read all of my quotes because then this video would be so long it would make my phone explode. But there's just so many great things here. But overall, to get to the point, the theme of this novel, or one of the themes, is growth, which is very prominent. You know, you're following a student's whole life. It focuses a lot on his schooling career, but it also goes back home with him and really wherever he ends up. And it goes through multiple stages of his life. And I have certain quotes here that I will share that kind of like support the fact that the theme is growth, specifically Stephen's growth. And excuse me for like reading off of this, but I did keep a commentary journal while I was reading this, so it's a little bit of a guide. The first quote is from towards the beginning of the book, when he is in the dormitory of his boarding school, and he's very young here, like elementary school age, grammar school age, and it's while he's getting ready for bed, simply. And it just says, his fingers trembled as he undressed himself in the dormitory. He told his fingers to hurry up. He had to undress and then kneel and say his own prayers and be in bed before the gas was lowered so that he might not go to hell when he died. So, at first glance, what I had here, I'll just read it. In this instance, Stephen is preparing to go to sleep following his trip to the chapel to fulfill his evening prayers. Specifically, Stephen is changing out of his school uniform and putting his pajamas on, and he intends to say his personal prayers and get settled in bed before the gas is lowered, which I assume is a reference to the heat being turned on, which I checked. That is true. In this passage, Joyce uses the lines so that he might not go to hell when he died to portray a genuine religious confusion and fear in relation to strict routines of faithful practices. Speaking from personal and observational experience, religious children often indulge in an all-or-nothing mindset when they first learn about certain things, when they're not really like understanding it yet. And one may believe that because of the fact that Christians are instructed to pray each night, one slip-up in routine can create a risky one-way ticket to hell. One may believe that if they don't pray before bed, fall asleep, and then happen to die in their sleep, they will be sent to hell. And Joyce's usage of this detail adequately illustrates Stephen's typical curiosity and confusion as a young religious person. And when I wrote this was like very early on, so I said, while I'm not sure what the theme of the book is right now, it's growth. It's safe to assume that it's growth. Throughout this passage, Stephen is displaying a sense of deep thought that was absent just a few pages ago when he was younger. So, yeah, here Joyce does a really great job of beginning to like illustrate that theme of growth without making it super obvious. Like, he uses a very small aspect of life that only a few people will get, which I think is a bold thing to do as an author, and it's like a very smart thing to do. You know, just like kind of like that naive sense where you want to do what's right, but you're just first learning what's right, and you're not sure how to do it yet, if that makes sense. And then, let's see, trying to find a good, I don't have to read all of this. Okay, the third quote that I had down was, the three patrons of holy youth, Saint Stanislaus Kostka, Saint Aloysius Gonzago, and Blessed John Birchmans, all with young faces because they had died when they were young, and Father Peter Kenny sitting in a chair wrapped in a big cloak. So at face value, that's just like a descriptive sentence, but I'll give you a little bit of context. And let me reiterate, if you haven't read this book, I heavily recommend that you read it and then watch this. But this passage takes place right after Stephen is like wrongfully punished by a teacher in class. He gets flogged because I forget what they term this person, but the person that was in the room to make sure that they were doing what they were supposed to do thought that he broke his glasses on purpose to get out of a lesson, when that was in fact not the case. So basically here, Stephen is walking to the rector's office, which is like one of the higher ups in the school, and he's going to advocate for himself. He's going to tell the rector like what happened, and as he's walking in the hallway, he's passing by portraits just like on the wall, and there's 3 saints, and the saints are like dead, of course, and they have just like normal portraits, kind of like I assume it's the standard portrait, like from here up, like smile maybe, but then there's a portrait of one of the priests at the school, and he's on a throne, and he is above all of the other portraits, and I thought that was really interesting. So I found that pretty meaningful. I feel like most people maybe would breeze past that, but I'll read what I wrote about this. As Stephen walks to the rector's office following his unjustified beating, he observes portraits on the linings of the hall. He notices that the saints, those who lived lives of pure peace and gentleness, perished at young ages. Furthermore, he observes that Father Peter Kenny, a simple man of faith, is throned above all. This comparison, skillfully and intentionally posed by Joyce, illustrates the idea that nice guys finish last. Stephen notices that while the priest, whom he identified as a race with the ability to sin in a prior scene, seems to be portrayed with a higher honor than those who dedicated their lives to goodness and to godliness. This may contribute to Stephen's mental growth and perception of life, due to the fact that his realization has the potential to shatter his childlike image of what goodness is, and whether holiness is more worthwhile than newly perceived honor. So basically what I meant by that was, like, this is one of the first times that Stephen is observing that even though the environment that he's in verbally worships people that have a holy like thing going on, the way that they portray this living person, this person of the world, over saints, like could impact him and could kind of like strike a realization in him, and I thought that was an interesting thing. So that was my first journal. This was from like early in the book, like first half, first chapter even. And then we have got a lot of writing. Okay. Cool. Okay. So we're jumping like very far in the book here. Let's see. Okay. And at this part, it's really important, and I do say again, I'm about to spoil like a big part of the book, so if you haven't read the book, then skip some of this, or just stop watching. So this is a quote from very later in the book when Stephen is like with a prostitute, essentially, and he's kind of, you know, in a way, temporarily abandoning his faith, because if you know anything about Christianity, you know, if you're not married, you probably shouldn't do that, and it's a prostitute anyway. But aside from that, you know, he went to like Jesuit boarding school, had a very like holy upbringing. So this is kind of like a very big turning point in the book. So I will read the quote now. His lips would not bend to kiss her. He wanted to be held firmly in her arms, to be caressed slowly, slowly, slowly. In her arms, he felt that he had suddenly become strong and fearless and sure of himself, but his lips would not bend to kiss her. And then, in relation to this, I wrote, in this moment, Stephen, who was a teenager, he was like 14, is acting upon his first extreme feelings of lust. He had expressed earlier that he wanted to sin with another of his kind, to force another being to sin with him, and to exult with her in sin. That was a direct quote. To act upon his horniness, Stephen decides to engage with a prostitute. He ends up kissing her and sleeping with her. This moment is a turning point for Stephen in the novel. If it wasn't for this interaction with the prostitute, Stephen would have never fallen into a habit of sin, followed by a period of guilt and enlightenment, followed by his devout era, followed by him being closer to normal while still keeping faith. This also supports a theme of growth, because this is the first time that Stephen gives in to his temptation of sin. Not once before this in the novel does Stephen sin outright, like very obviously stated sinning. I assume that he did at some point. But here he sins without much of an inner trial. This change in morals and behavior demonstrates Stephen's ongoing growth throughout the novel. So, yeah, when I was writing this second part, this is when I finished. I wrote my second commentary journal after I was done. But obviously, Stephen's like experience with the prostitute kind of it changed him in a way, and it kind of like forced him to grow up in a certain way too, and do a lot of self-evaluation. You know, after this, if you read the book, as you know, he fell into like a pattern of this, doing the same sort of stuff for like multiple years until he heard a sermon at a retreat that kind of like scared him into changing his ways. But it definitely shows some sort of growth, and even though it can be said that this is not positive growth, it still is some sort of growth, like towards a new personality, or towards a new like way of life. And yeah, and then let's see, this one was interesting here. So another quote, this is from like when he was in his cycle of sin, so kind of like in between this him being with a prostitute for the first time and the sermon. It says, a certain pride, a certain awe withheld him from offering to God even one prayer at night, though he knew it was in God's power to take away his life while he slept and hurl his soul hellward ere he could beg for mercy. So here, if you remember the quote that we started with, this is a big change. So I said, Differing from earlier in his life, Stephen now seems to approach prayer carelessly when compared to how he approached prayer as a child. When Stephen was much younger, prayer was an important part of his daily and nightly routine, and he would not go to bed without his evening prayer. Now, Stephen has fallen into patterns of sin and struggles to pray in the evening at all. He has obviously lost some urgency within his faith. This change signifies a new phase of Stephen's life, which supports the theme of growth. As a person grows up, they tend to go through phases. There's kind of some Captain Obvious stuff in here. Let's see. This is especially true for religious people. You have the first stage, which is when you're a child. You are educated on your beliefs and are expected to pursue them. Like the period of your life where, like, Catholics go to CCD, or you know, go to youth group or something like that. And then after that, people tend to have a period of questioning. You get that slightly unsettling moment when you realize that some things within your faith don't line up with one another, or like within your understanding they don't line up with one another, because it's impossible to know everything. Most people get past that. Then you have a period of non-practice or bad faith, followed by a period of all-in devoutness, or vice versa. These phases don't really have age ranges assigned to them, but they hint towards growth, especially in terms of perception. So, like, the perception part is a really big part of this. Like, in this moment, Stephen is kind of, like, he doesn't, it's not that he doesn't care, he just doesn't, like, see it anymore. And I thought that that was really interesting. And let's see. Yeah, and then after this, as I mentioned before, while Stephen was going through his period of sin and kind of questionable behavior, he participated in a retreat of sorts at his school, which, if you don't know what that is, for religious people, it's when you, in most cases, go to a residential area, if it's a multi-day retreat, that has a church, and then you go to church and you kind of like participate in religious activities during your time at this retreat. So he went to one of these, and one of the priests was giving a homily or a sermon, or was preaching, and basically it gave like this horrific description of hell and how bad it is, and how everyone that's there should repent as soon as possible. And it really kind of gave Stephen that feeling like, oh no, like, what's going on? That's me. And, you know, kind of instilled some fear, because he knew that he was in a bad spot with his faith. So basically the quote says, why was he kneeling there like a child, saying his evening prayers, to be alone with his soul, to examine his conscience, to meet his sins face to face, to recall their times and manners and circumstances, to weep over them? So basically in this moment, Stephen is kind of like alarmed by the nature of the sermon that he just heard, and he feels a deep connection to it, and he feels almost called out by it. So I wrote, in this instance, Stephen had just heard a priest talk in depth about hell during a retreat. This speech instilled a new fear of God in Stephen and triggered a new stage of life for him after this. Stephen truly changes his outlook and handling of life as a whole. He becomes a very devout Jesuit, so much so that he almost joins the priesthood. So here Stephen prays for the first time in a long while in order to look inside himself and confront his conscience and sins. This new behavior signifies growth within Stephen and maybe even a sense of emotional intelligence. Stephen holds himself accountable like never before in this moment. It truly expresses a sense of reflection and regret. These new thoughts, feelings, and behaviors signal a theme of growth in the novel. So that's just another example. And then, yeah, that's basically all I had in terms of quotes. But I just kind of, I don't know, this novel is so interesting, and you know, I wanted to talk about it before I forgot it, because, you know, if I'm being completely honest, and some people aren't, but you know, you don't remember every aspect of a book after you read it after a certain period of time. And this is a book that I'm going to be reading again, because I'll tell you right now, I don't completely understand it, and most people don't. But I think that every time that I read it, I'll understand it a little bit more. And, you know, thank you everybody for watching, and read more books. And if you guys found any other themes in this novel, please let me know in the comments and tell me about it, because even though I was talking about growth in this certain video, there's so much more here. So, Portrait, James Joyce. Awesome book. See you guys.